in the last week of this particular series, which is the Old School Encounters, okay? We're talking about encounters because our vision as a church is to have life-changing encounters in the presence of God. That's what we're here for. We want to encounter the Lord. And so in days like this, even in that song, I feel like every time we sing that song, it just has a special place for us to go. And just the Lord just continues to touch and to speak and just draw us in. I'm so excited about that. But what my hope is that today, you are going to realize that God is with you daily. He's with you, always. Matter of fact, whenever you might have some of those highs and you just had these miraculous, amazing encounters and you were at that place where God was just really touching your heart, or maybe it was one of those places where you've just in despair and hurt and in your sorrow and the Lord was there, that even in all of those places, in all of those ways, we tend to sometimes find ourselves lingering to get back to those places. As odd as it may sound, even in our pain, we like to be there sometimes because the Lord ministers to us in specific ways. But my hope is that today, as we talk about the different kinds of encounters, that you're going to realize that God is always with you. Matter of fact, he's given you and me something very special. He's given us his presence, his voice, his love. And that today, by the end of the day, I want us to walk away knowing, man, we are right where we need to be in his presence daily. As a matter of fact, in Psalm 46:10, there's this particular thing that God says. He says this, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. We're not good at that. None of us are really good at that. To actually just stop and be still, to let everything go on around us, just to calm down and know that God is in complete control. And so my hope is that we can dig into this today. And we're going to do that by looking at the life of Elijah. So if you want to get out your Bibles, go to First Kings. And we're going to be in chapter 18. And I'm going to just kind of hold a place there for it. But I'm hoping that we can get into this today because I want you to know this. Our greatest encounters will be the ones that happen daily, in the stillness of our lives, full of trust and hope that comes from the steady voice of God in our hearts. Those are the greatest encounters you can have. The problem is we tend to talk about the encounters on the mountaintop, the ones where God did something wild and awesome and powerful and bright. But I'm telling you, the greatest encounter that you can have is starting in the first place, which is realizing that God is actually with you right now, speaking to you. So I want to talk about Elijah. Elijah was a prophet. He was a very, very powerful prophet. He was a prophet to the nation of Israel. And at this time, there were 3 unique encounters that happened in a 2-chapter span. And many of these encounters we're going to look at today as we kind of pace through these. You're going to maybe look at your own life and realize maybe I've been kind of like maybe the first encounter or maybe the second one, but the third one here is where we're really going to go to. So we're heading in a direction with Elijah. The first one, though, is what I call the mountaintop experience. The mountaintop. You see, Elijah was considered great, right? In all of the Old Testament, man, Elijah was the man. He was it. He did some amazing, miraculous things. He lived, though, during a crazy time in Israel. Now, the Israelites had moved into the Promised Land, and there was some fighting and bickering between them, so they're now a divided nation, and he's a part of the northern kingdom. And in this northern kingdom, there was a king called King Ahab. Some of you may immediately know and have heard of the story about King Ahab. I always think of King Ahab as kind of a weak king. He was swayed by whatever it was that would give him popularity or maybe just swayed by his own emotions. And there's even one time he cried because he couldn't get a field that he wanted. And he had to get his wife to help him out. But his wife, does anybody remember his wife's name? Jezebel. Yeah. Now, if you don't know this, she's not a good person in the Bible. Okay? Not good. Matter of fact, Jezebel is not an actual Israelite. She actually is a Phoenician princess that Ahab had married outside of the nation of Israel. And so what's interesting is as the Israelites had moved into the Promised Land, in Deuteronomy 7, there's this particular verse that God is actually warning his people. He's like, look, don't marry outside of the Israelites. Because if you do, they may sway you to follow other gods. They may shape and position you to go after other gods. And so here, King Ahab certainly did not listen to what God was saying. And he began to marry this woman and began to invite Baal worship into his country. What I think is interesting is Jezebel, the Hebrew name for Jezebel, it means this, where is the Baal? And Elijah's name means, my God is Yahweh. So we are already starting to set up a little bit of a battle zone here. You know what I mean? We already feel the tension already beginning to rise. And it was during this time that Elijah comes on the scene that he's trying to get the nation of Israel to come back to worshiping God. And as he's doing this, he's going back and he's already told them, listen, there's going to be a drought because the nation has already turned their back on God, and a drought is going to come. God allows for this drought to come because he wants the heart of his people to come back to him. And it's during this drought that God speaks to Elijah, and Elijah goes back and he finds this man named Obadiah. Now, Obadiah, during the drought, he was a palace administrator for Ahab. And during this time, King Ahab's wife, Jezebel, had been going and killing off all the prophets of God. Clearly here you can already see Jezebel is deciding she's trying to silence the voice of God among his people. And Obadiah is on God's side, and he goes and he tries to rescue, and he ends up saving 100 prophets of God and hides them in caves. And while all this is going on, Elijah is just outside, kind of outside of the area. He's kind of just watching this play out, and he gets called back now to go and to bring a word. And so he tells Obadiah, hey, go tell King Ahab I want a meeting. And so that's where we're going to pick up in 1 Kings 18, 16 through 20. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, is that you troubler of Israel? Now, time out. Elijah is speaking on behalf of God, warning God, and Jezebel, his wife, is the one murdering all these people in the country to silence the voice of God coming through the prophets. But he's already picked a side, I guess. That's fine. Verse 18, I've not made trouble for Israel, Elijah replied, but you and your father's family have. You've abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel. Ooh, it's like the showdown. When I was in high school, one of the things was like, yeah, I'll see you at the Taco Casa parking lot. You know, it's like I'll keep going. And bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table, which, I don't know if y'all are doing the math. That's 850 people at a table. That's a big table. So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. So Ahab goes and he gets all these prophets, 850 prophets that were part of Jezebel's table, all the people going after the Baals. Baal was the deity that they had worshipped at this time. And Baal's kind of bride or wife or whatever was Asherah. And so they had all these prophets for them. And they decided they're going to now go meet Elijah, who's going to meet them on Mount Carmel, and something is about to go down. So what happens is when they get there, Elijah had this plan, right? God had set this up from the beginning, and they're going to go up on Mount Carmel, and here's what's going to happen. Elijah knows that God is going to prove himself to the nation. Elijah's not going up there for himself necessarily, not even for King Ahab, not even to speak to the prophets of Baal. This is for the nation to turn their heart back to God. And so they get up there, and he says, listen, what's going to happen is you put a sacrifice on your altar, because the mountain that they're on right now, this is Mount Carmel. And Mount Carmel used to have an altar for the Lord, but it got torn down, and now there's an altar for Baal. Now, what I always think of is in our own personal lives, there's so many parallels to this. So many people, they worship the Lord, and they worship the Lord in specific ways, and they just like go after God in their heart. And sometimes in those areas of your life, you sacrifice that particular area and you give it over to something else. Like, let me explain. One of the biggest things is like everybody with like, I don't know, your time. Time is really important to people. Sunday mornings are very important to come together and gather as a group of people. But sometimes this altar that we give to the Lord, like on my Sunday mornings, Lord, that's your time. And then all of a sudden, there are other seasons and other times when the sun comes out, you know, and the waters at PK get nice and warm, and the fish start coming back around. And that area and that time and that place that you had built an altar for you to go and worship the Lord starts to look a lot nicer maybe if I went to the lake for that week. Does that make sense? And we sacrifice some area of our life and give it to something else that brings us some other joy and pleasure. So we do this in a lot of ways with our finances, with our time, with a lot of different things. Man, I remember waking up early in the morning and just praying at 5 a.m. And I was like, no, Lord, that's sleep time. That's dedicated to Joey's sleep time. But when he asks for something, we give it to him. That is your time, Lord. You can have that time. So when I think of like an altar, Sometimes I have to translate kind of how that even applies for me today. What have I given? What have I torn down and said, no, Lord, I want to put something else up there right now? So here they are. All the prophets of Baal are up there. There's 850 of them. They now get the sacrifice ready. And they're getting ready to worship. But then I started to think about, like, why would you tear down this area? Why would you tear down something for God? The people were called the treasured possession. These were special. The Israelites were special to God. And yet they turned their back on him. We read the stories from Exodus all the way to the promised land, all the way to just king after king and nation just going back and forth. And they serve God, then they don't serve God, and they serve God. And I was like, what is it that entices us so much to just turn our backs on God? And for everybody, it's a little different. But in this season, here's what I know about the worship of Baal. Let me describe to you what the worship of Baal looked like. We're in a family environment, so I'm going to use some language here, okay, that'll help you kind of work with me and help understand. The worship of Baal was all about sexual promiscuity. It's like, man, they would sleep with everybody. It didn't matter. It was all rampant. Just have at it. And coming from those environments, there were pregnancies. So what was the second part? Not only was it sexual promiscuity, but then it was all of a sudden child sacrifice. And I thought, oh my gosh. That sounds a whole lot like America. And I started to think, man, how have we actually turned? I know that there may not be altars set up in people's homes. It's like, oh, there's Baal in my corner. That's him. We worship that on the weekends. No. But we participate in Baal worship in our actions and our deeds. And we've turned our back on God, the one who we were supposed to be in love with and to chase after and to follow. Why? Because, man, sin makes me feel better sometimes. You know, sin may taste good on one end, but there's death that will always come. Death is always what comes from sin. And so here they are, seeking approval and prosperity from Baal and offering themselves up like this. So Elijah stands up and he calls them back. He's like, come back to the Lord. So here we are in 1 Kings 18:21. Elijah went before the people and he said, how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. But the people said nothing. I love how he sets this up. Listen, if God is God, follow him. If Baal is God, listen, he knows Baal ain't no God, okay? He's not actually giving them the real option. And here's what we're about to find out as we're moving into this. 1 Kings 18:26. So he sets them up. He's like, have at it. You call on your God Baal. Let's see who shows up today. Your altar's up here. We're on your mountain. Let's have at it. So 1 Kings 18:26. So they took the bull given them and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar that they had made. Man, they were going after it, man. If you keep reading, you find out they started cutting themselves. They were just crying out. They were doing anything that they could. I mean, all day. They just kept going. Just worshiping and crying out. They were doing anything. They were trying to cut themselves. They were trying to declare. They're doing everything that they could do to try to get Baal's attention. And then my favorite thing, one of my favorite things in all the Bible happens. Y'all know what that is? Ooh, Elijah gets a little wild hair and decides, I'm going to start making fun of these guys. I feel like he's a little feisty, you know? Because he's sitting back. He's probably getting bored, you know? You're up on this mountain. Nothing's working out. He's like, you know what? I'm going to just poke at this a little bit. So there they are. Here's what he says. He goes, hey, why don't y'all try shouting a little louder? He says, maybe he's thinking about other stuff, you know? Maybe your God's just busy thinking about what's going on for the next weekend, you know? I don't know. Just keep trying. Shout louder. He goes on, he says, maybe he's busy. Maybe Baal's just busy this weekend. And he says, oh, I bet Baal's on a journey. I bet he went off and he's not listening anymore. And there they are just getting after it. They're crying out, doing all things. He's just goating it the whole time, you know what I mean? And then he says, oh, I bet he's sleeping. That's what it is. Baal's just sleeping on you. And they're just trying so hard to get the fire to come down. They want their Baal to show up, and he's just getting after it. And nothing. And here's what I know. If you ever try to put your heart into something that is not God, someone that's not God, guess what? You're going to get nothing. You can cry out. You can march around it. You can do everything you can, and nothing is going to happen. So Elijah, it's his turn, you know? His turn, he's like, all right, listen. There's an altar that had been torn down. So it says that Elijah rebuilds the altar for the Lord. And then he does something very beautiful. He takes 12 stones. Now, in the Old Testament, when they'd gather 12 stones, it represented the 12 tribes of Israel. Remember, at this time, they're a divided nation, but Elijah's prophesying already. He's building the nation of Israel back in these stones as he's setting up this altar. He prepares this bull. He gets it all ready because he's like, listen, my God's about to show off, right? He knows it. So that at 1 King 18, he gets ready to, he's about ready to step up for the time of sacrifice. But before he does, you know what he does? He says, listen, just to make sure you guys know that there's nothing going on here, there's no little hidden tricks, pour some water on that altar. So all these guys, they go over and they start pouring the water on the altar. He goes, now listen, I don't want y'all thinking that y'all should have put more on. So let's do it a second time. Add more water to the sacrifice, because if fire's going to burn it up, I want you to make sure it's all wet and all so you know it's not just me. A third time comes around, he's like, now listen, dig a trench, fill it up with water, dump it all over again. So make sure it's saturated, because I want y'all to make sure you know there's no pyrotechnics going on, right? Then he steps up, and here's what it says. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed. Notice already the contrast. They're cutting themselves, doing everything they can. They're trying to do something, and all Elijah is going to have to do is just pray, a very simple prayer. He says, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. So he's like, look, the Lord has called this meeting. Everything that has happened is because the Lord wanted it this way. Then he says this, answer me, Lord. Answer me so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. Huge contrast. These guys, 850 of them, worshiping, marching, dancing, sacrificing, everything that they can do to get the attention of a Baal who's not listening. And then all of a sudden, Elijah steps up with a simple prayer. 1 Kings 18:38. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. Could you imagine seeing that and then getting to sing this song, Who is Like the Lord? Like, I got to imagine that song got birthed in that moment, Who is like the Lord? Baal who? God. I mean, only God, right? And now the nation begins to shift. You can tell the heart shifts. They have to catch all 850 of these false prophets, and they put them to death. And then the whole nation. Matter of fact, Elijah looks at King Ahab. He's like, listen, you just go ahead and go home. You just eat and drink, because the Lord's going to bring a rain. I mean, at that moment, they knew the Lord is the Lord. He is the one. And this moment, this encounter, this mountaintop experience just happened. Fire came down. If you think it's bright in here, just wait until it moves like that. Just a fire and the heat. You ever put gasoline on a fire you're trying to start, and you put a little too much, and you strike that match, and about 3 feet away, it's like, whoof, and just takes off? That's probably a lot like what it was going on up there. Amazing, bright, beautiful. It's like it moved them. They could feel the heat. It touched all the senses right there on that mountaintop. And everything now is going to be changed, right? Have you ever had one of those moments where the fire of God came and just consumed that part of your life, and you just felt fresh, you felt new, you felt like everything in the world has been available to you now? You're about to come off that mountain. You're like, you just wait until my school gets it. Y'all ever been to like summer camp? You know what I'm talking about? Oh, you're on fire for the Lord. You come home, I'm going to win the nations. I'm like, you haven't even been to like Tarrant County yet, okay? But the point is this. You all know what that's like, to have that kind of a mountaintop experience. You also all know what it's like to have a Monday morning that follows that mountain experience. Because here's what happens. In 1 Kings 19, it starts a new chapter. It says that Ahab, tattletale, goes and tells Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with a sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger, because she's too afraid to go talk to him herself. It goes to Elijah. It says, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them, all her prophets that had died. So Elijah was what? He's afraid. He just saw the fire fall. He's standing in front of 850 versus 1 on a mountaintop. That man must have been filled with so much courage, so much just tenacity to get in front and be like, I'm going to even mock them. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, after all of this mountaintop experience, one little word from Jezebel comes in, shifts his heart. He's in fear. He runs off. He hides under a tree. He literally tells God, I just want to die. He goes from mountaintop experience to suicidal thoughts, depression, anxiety. And he just lays under this tree and takes a nap. I know that many people have had mountaintop experiences just to turn around and instantly feel like the world is caving in. I know it. Here's what it looks like, because this is where we start to get into the second phrase, right? The second thing that you're going to start to realize is that you need to understand his presence sustains. This is another kind of encounter that happens, right? You see, Elijah's not strutting anymore. He's running away. He's hiding. He's calling for God just to take him away. He's in despair. He went from a mountaintop experience with God to this valley of despair. But I know I've seen the parallels in just the modern day vibe with us, right? We come through this powerful encounter, right? And you gave up that addiction, but now your loved ones don't believe you, and the weight of all of that and walking that out just seems too much, and you just throw in the towel. I've seen people go through these powerful encounters, and they repent of the affair, but trust is completely gone, and rebuilding that relationship seems so overwhelming that you can't even do it. You're in despair. I've seen people go through these powerful encounters, and they made the move all the way to Parker County, and yet when they got here, all of a sudden they realized there's no family, there's no friends, and no connections, and they just fall into sorrow and despair. But it came from this mountaintop experience. What happened? What happened? The powerful encounter, and then you get your life back on track. The fire of God came, and you just ran down to the altar, but then all of a sudden, you didn't know how to sustain it, and you find yourself just laying down going, God, I'm done. I'm done. I want to tell you this. You are not alone. You are not alone. The most powerful prophet in all of the Old Testament is Elijah. And guess what? He had the same experience you've had. He was up on that mountain, saw the fire of God, and then immediately fell into depression, and he ran. But here's what you have to look at. I know that in the New Testament context, in Matthew 11, God says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. The problem is Elijah wasn't running to God for his rest. He was running to God because he just wanted to die. He just wanted to throw in the towel. And he goes out there and he hides. But here's what it says in the scriptures, that an angel of the Lord comes and gives him a meal. I like how he's sleeping. The angel of the Lord's, I imagine it's like this. It's not what it said. He kind of gives him a little kick. Hey, get up, dude. I made you a sandwich. And it's like, you got some food. And he rolls over and he eats. But Elijah, instead of realizing, oh my gosh, God has just provided, God sustained me in my depression and in my despair, he just rolls back over and goes back to sleep. You know why? Because depression wants to keep you in isolation. Depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts, they try to distance you so much so that you run away. Matter of fact, here's what Elijah says to God. I'm the only one in this nation that listens to you and speaks on your behalf. But we actually know that's not true. I told you about Obadiah, who saved 100 of the prophets in caves. He's not alone. By far, he's not alone. But when you ran away and hid yourself in the desert, you certainly became alone. But here's what I want you to know is that God's presence sustains you even in depression and despair. Because guess what? The angel of the Lord comes back. He says, hey, get up. I made more food for you this time. Except this time, you know what he says? You got to eat this because it needs to sustain you for what comes next. In other words, sometimes, hold with me for a second. Sometimes, I want you to hear what I'm saying in this. Sometimes we get into depression and despair and we find ourselves underneath that tree just camping out thinking we're all by ourselves, and the Lord that continues to come sustain you, you get addicted to that feeling of how the Lord's sustaining you and bringing you a sandwich. You're addicted to the pray for me again for that same thing I've been dealing with for the last 3 years, and you're unwilling to actually sit with the Lord and eat and rise up and let it sustain you so that you can move out of that valley of despair. I want to tell you that you've got to see that God is providing for you there, not to keep you there. He didn't bring Elijah food so that he would stay there. He brought him food to sustain him for what comes next. I'm telling you, I need you to realize that God, even in your weakest, most desperate need, is sustaining you and there with you so that you can get yourself up in his presence and begin to move. And that's what God says to him. He says, listen, I got another encounter for you coming. And he says, I need you to go up on this other mountain now. And he sends him to Sinai. Now, Sinai is the mountain that God had encountered Moses on numerous times. It would have been very familiar to them. They're like, oh, this is the mountain. Here's what God says to him. He didn't tell him to go to the top of the mountain. He says, I need you to get out of this valley, and I need you to go to about the middle of the mountain. I got a cave you're going to sit in there because I'm going to pass by. Because church, listen, sometimes we get so wrapped up in the highs and the lows of pursuing God that we become spiritual junkies, never really seeking him and his presence, but we're just seeking all the feels and all the things that we get from all the different encounters. And I'm telling you that God has something special for Elijah that I think translates for us in this room today. Let's keep going. Here's the third kind of encounter that he's about to have. I call it, it's him daily. God invites Elijah into this encounter on the side of the mountain. 1 Kings 19. The Lord said, Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there came an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. 3 major elements happened right in front of Elijah. The first one is the wind. This is one of those, like, we always talk about it like the Spirit of God, wind blow, God, would you, and I feel like, the wind moves people, right? When the wind picks up, man, some of you may have felt the wind of God pick you up and plant you somewhere else. We've seen it, how God begins to blow and he sustains you through the wind in your sails, and it's like the wind that lifts the plane. God just lifting you up with this wind. It's like, I'm going to rise up like wings on an eagle. You know what I mean? Like, we use this terminology because God's done it before. He's been in the wind. We've seen him work like this. He used the wind to part the seas. A great wind comes and blows the seas apart so that all of the Israelites could pass over the Red Sea. But guess what? The Lord's trying to tell Elijah something. He's like, I got something deeper for you here. We're trying to go deeper, not more. We want you to go deep. We want you in maturity. And he's like, look, I'm not in the wind right now. And then all of a sudden, he could feel the earth start to shake. And he's like, oh, this powerful earthquake, it just starts rattling. I know you've had this experience where all of a sudden God started to move and your whole life felt like, man, it just got shook. Man, the foundations of what you thought you believed because the enemy's a liar had put in there, man, the Lord just shook all that and he put you back on the solid rock, on Jesus, and you could stand right. And you've experienced that kind of encounter with the Lord. But he says, look, I'm not in the earthquake either today. And then the fire starts coming by. This would have immediately been like, oh, it's like the fire from the mountain. I was just on Mount Carmel. I just saw this encounter. I just saw this very thing. I just watched the fire. And the fire comes and it's like blowing right by. And then guess what? The Lord's not in that either. Here's my point. Sometimes God knows that you're going to keep chasing after that encounter that you had before. You're going to pay all that money to go see that band, that worship band that you're like, oh, I had a really good encounter. I'm going to go back and watch them again. Oh, that speaker, I'm going to travel all that way to see that speaker. We'll do all these things chasing mountaintop after mountaintop after mountaintop like a bunch of spiritual junkies trying to find that old encounter that we've already had. And the Lord's like, I may not be in that. I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing. I want you to hear what I'm saying, okay? I love it. Let's go see the bands. Let's go listen to speakers. It's great. We're going to have a great time. We're going to go encounter the Lord in those places. But listen, if you're chasing after encounter more than you're chasing after him, that's what I'm talking. You're chasing the feels. You're like, ooh, man, if it was just a little bit brighter, if it was a little bit louder, if that band would have done just a little bit better, oh, I think I would have felt the stirring. You're like, no. Is he good enough for you? Is just his presence good enough for you? Because here's where he was. At the back end, he was on that whisper. And the Hebrew word for that whisper was dimamah. And the word dimamah means this: quiet, calm, silence, still. It's not like all this stuff goes by and all of a sudden Elijah's standing there, he's like, hey, buddy, I'm going to tell you where you're going to go now. It's not like that. He's standing on the side of the mountain and all that stuff goes through it, and I bet you there's a slight moment where he's like, what are you doing, God? I was like all depressed, and I came up here for this, and you weren't in any of this stuff? And then all of a sudden, it was like a punch in the gut, right? You ever had that moment where the Lord begins to move and you just do this? And you can't know if you're not real sure if he said something yet to you. But you felt something so strong in your spirit and in your heart that it literally physically brings you into this kind of a posture. And it says Elijah, in this posture, he takes his hood and he literally brings it over his head. It's this position of, I'm willing to step down into obscurity because something is starting to happen in my spirit. God is beginning to talk to me. And listen, remember, we're in a setup. In the silence and in the still and this gentle whisper, in all the chaos that Elijah has seen, all the ups and the downs and the craziness of his life, this one moment, this one gentle whisper deep into his soul, and he knew that God is so real that my life is now going to be changed because that voice that's right there with me right now, speaking to me about his love and how I'm his treasured possession, like he goes, that's what I need every single day. That's what you get every single day. That kind of encounter will sustain you in the stillness, in the calmness, in the silence. Be still and know that I am God. Man, you may have all sorts of dreams and hopes and ambitions and the swirliness of the world's going on and this and that and the ups and downs. It's a crazy world. But listen, you want the greatest kind of encounter that you can ever have. It is going to be found in the stillness and the calm when the Spirit of God begins to speak to your heart and your soul and your conscience. And all you can do is go, and you just stay. A guy named Donald Wiseman said this. He said, the voice of God speaking to the conscience, illuminating the mind, and stirring resolve in individual and nation may follow and is often preferable to the loud roaring and thunder of cosmic events on Sinai, where he's standing, and on Carmel, where he's been. Robert Weston says this. He said, the Lord came to Elijah not by works of violence, but in a new and deeper way. He says that one translator renders this delightfully as being with the sound of silence. It is a phrase pregnant with awe and mystery. After all three elemental cacophony, stillness reigned again at last. In other words, all of that. You ever feel like you're on a roller coaster in life? Just the up and the down and the craziness and the whirlwind and the job and the tests and the things and the reports and all that's going on. You know what the Lord has given us? He's given us a daily encounter that exists right in the stillness, right in the quiet, where you can just cover yourself up privately in your own home, in your own prayer closet, and begin to just get with the Creator of everything, the one who so loves you and he sees you as his treasured possession. That is the kind of daily encounter that you and I get to have. And all the chasing after the mountains, listen, I'm telling you, sometimes those are great. Sometimes they're fun. Sometimes you're actually called into them. Sometimes it just happens. Sometimes you're just there. Sometimes depression gets a hold of you and you just get frustrated and you go and you find yourself in the valley, but God's trying to lay out something for Elijah. He's showing him something. He's showing something I think to you and to me is like, all that stuff is good, but you better be able to just silence yourself and have the kind of radical encounter that carries you through every single day. Here's what it looks like. It's that steady place of calm trust in the still small voice where we're going to live the bulk of our lives. And it looks like this. It's a Dimimah prayer. It's a place of quiet intercession and prayer and getting before the Lord with nobody else looking. But a lot of times we don't like those because we can't post those on social media so that people know how spiritual we are. And then it's the Dimimah Bible reading where you open the Word of God and you're like, He wrote me this whole thing so that I could go to it anytime I need. And you begin to read, and you're not reading it so you can say like, man, I'm trying to spread the waters of my life. Like, Willinda, if you're not careful chasing all this stuff and doing all things, you're going to have this really shallow pool that you're trying to build out. But God, through this process of daily encounters, is trying to get you to dig a well so deep of maturity that, man, there is so much to draw on for the rest of your life. You'll never need anything else but just Him. And in this moment of Bible reading, when you start to study it and meditate on it, it's like the words get into your brain and they sear into your heart and it begins to form your being around what God has spoken in your life, and you memorize it and you soak on it and you take it again. You're like, I've read it 1,000 times, but I can't keep but just reading it again, just in the silence and in the moment, just allowing God to move and to breathe in my spirit. It's in prayer, Bible reading, it's in trust and obey, it's in wisdom, and it's in knowledge. It is the daily bread of wisdom that God gives you. It is the encounters of stillness that He's providing. It is His presence morning, noon, and night. It is the peace of knowing He is right there with you. That's, church, if I can give you one thing today, it's that, man, mountaintop experiences, the moments of hurt and pain where He's with you, those are great moments with the Lord. But the ones that you need more than anything are the ones that are happening right now in your soul, where God is beginning to speak and you have an opportunity to listen, because that is the place of depth, that is the place of wisdom, that is the place where you are sustained. And Elijah needed to be called back to the center line so that for the rest of his life, man, God gave some very direct plans. He brought people into his life. He told him who's going to be king next. He laid all these plans out, not in the mountaintop or in the valley, but right there in the middle where He said, daily, you're going to listen to my voice. And that's what we get. It's these private prayers that center your life and bring you back to his daily, perpetual presence that is more vital than anything else you could ever have. I want to invite you, church, to that place of daily encounters in the stillness. When all the voices get silent, when all your desires are quieted, when all the hopes and ambitions and your fears, they die off with the silence that exists between you and the Lord when he gets to speak to you. Would you like to have those kinds of encounters daily? I want to tell you, first thing is you need a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. You need to give your life to him and invite the presence of God that indwells us. That's what you need first, to receive him. So today, if you need that, I want you to come down. When the prayer team's here, please come down. We have a baptism service coming soon. We have 17 more people wanting to get baptized again. It's because people are recognized there is something that God is doing in this place. There's something about this little spot of land in Hudson Oaks, right in the middle of Park County, that God has began to stir up and to move something in this place, that people are coming and saying, I've got to give my life to Jesus. I have never seen what is happening in this church right now, where people are willing to stand up in the middle of a service. I'm used to close your eyes and somebody just secretly usher them in. I will hand you a certificate. Just get it in the back. I'm like, people are walking down going, I need Jesus. And we need it. We need more. We need God to just continue to move. I need us just to release, God, whatever you want, you get. You want this kind of worship, you can have this kind of worship. You want me to share my story in HEB, I'll share my story in HEB. You want me to interrupt that person's day because you just need to give them a word, then we'll make it happen. So I want you to stand up with me. I'm going to have the prayer team come down. If you need healing in your body, I believe that we as a church, we believe in a God who heals. And if you want to come down here, we would love to pray with you for your healing. If you need to give your life to Jesus today, I'm just asking, please come down. We'd love to pray with you, help guide you through that process. If you just need somebody to pray over you to help resettle your heart, your spirit, your mind, man, we would love to do that with you today. Whatever you need prayer for, come on down. But I wanted to end the service a little differently today. In Psalm 46, it ends with, be still and know that I'm God. But I just thought, man, this one chapter in Psalm really helped to lay out what we were kind of going through today. And so I want to read this text over you today. And I want you to receive the word of the Lord in this. And then when I'm done reading this, I'm going to say amen, and I'm going to walk off this platform. And we're just going to let the piano keep playing for a little while. And if you want to just stay in here for a second and hear from the Lord or to pray with somebody, please do that. If it's time to go, if you need some coffee or whatever you need to eat, you can go ahead and go too. But I just wanted to end it a little bit differently today. So here, I'm going to read this over us today. Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam with the mountains quake and with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see what the Lord has done. The desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. And he says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Amen.